called The Thing when I saw the original film. It was 1952, and I would have been about 4 or 5 years old. I think I saw it in a re-release. It was one of those films where, as you watched it, it was so frightening that my popcorn flew out of my hands. In other words, when they went up to the doorway and they had this a Geiger counter, they opened the door and he's right there. I went nuts. I went crazy. Then I subsequently read the short story in high school, and I realized it was a lot different than the movie. What they'd done in the first film was kind of make the James Arness monster more like a Frankenstein creature. And yes, he could. He was a kind of a vegetable that could reproduce various life forms, but he wasn't the imitator, the creature that could imitate any life form from the original story. The John W. Campbell story, Who Goes There, was basically an Agatha Christie kind of 10 Little Indians. You know, this creature is in your midst, and he's imitating either one or all of us, who's human and who isn't. And that kind of an idea really fascinated me.
We had, the doctor, actually put his arms in there and then start to close the machine, right? And then we cut. And what we do is we come to another angle, right? Where we've actually replicated the doctor's arms perfectly, making it out of Jell-O, right? We made the arms out of Jell-O. We had wax bones built into the arms, and we had rubber veins and gelatin veins and all this stuff, so it was like, living tissue. And at this point, what we did was we actually took a mold of the actor's face that was playing the doctor. And what we did was we actually found the guy that had no arms. His arms were actually cut off here, right, in an injury. An industrial accident, right? And very, very great guy, this guy. And we basically made a prosthetic that actually looked exactly like the doctor and glued it on this person's face. And we glued the gelatin arms onto his arms, right? So we have him in there, and what happens is the stomach is actually hydraulic, so it's made out of something that would be like, same device that a tractor works with to pick up, a lot of, weight. And when this thing slams shut, it actually rips right through the Jell-O, punctures the plastic veins, which sends blood flying all over the place. And then the actor with no arms, pulls his arms out, and now he's just got the prosthetic damage, on, and blood shooting all over the place, and that's a really good shot in the movie. That one was really tough to do and very inventive, very tough to do. I would even be scared to do that again.
That sequence is so etched in the minds of people who see this movie. Everywhere I have ever been in the world, someone has spoken to me, and I kid you not. Everywhere I've ever been, I do a lot of traveling. Someone comes up to me on the street and speaks to me about that movie and about that sequence specifically.
Then we actually had to start getting the footage of his head coming on. And, obviously for this shot, we couldn't use Charlie Hallahan, right? So he actually made like a perfect replica of this guy's head. And fully, animated it, with mechanical effects and whatnot, And in it had a hydraulic ram that would actually stretch the neck out and sever the rubber at exactly a perfect point. And again, this was only you could only do it in one take. All right, and when it stretches open and the skin rips, what I wanted to see inside was something that was very reminiscent of like what's in a comic book whenever you see goo stretching or whatever. It's like really stringy stuff. So we really didn't know how to make that stuff, and there was nothing that would sort of stretch that far. So what we did was we just started, melting plastic and getting bubble gum, and making this crazy concoction that I'm sure was like so toxic, it couldn't be good for you, right? And what we did is right before the shot, we had, the whole replica of Hallahan's body, and we actually had this goo that we would pile in there really quick. And the whole time it's giving off fumes like paint thinner and lacquer thinner and all this kind of stuff. And again, we have effects guys buried in the little table underneath to operate the stuff, and then all these guys that have rehearsed the motion of the neck coming off and everything without doing the split, transforming in front of the dogs, and then the point at which the humans see it. And at the point at which the humans see it, it was very important to also understand that what again we were looking at was an amorphous shape that you could really call a thing. So when the big mass or the dog or what it is transformed to pulls itself up into the corner of the ceiling, trying to back up and escape, from these guys and the dogs and everything, it just wants to be left alone. It's got nowhere to go. So basically, these guys are looking at it and they go to torch it, and what happens is it rips open, and then this really strange kind of formation comes out that looks much like a flower. And in essence, if you go back and freeze frame, what it actually is it's not a flower. It's about, like, I don't know how many dog tongues. It's a bunch of dog tongues, and there's dog teeth growing out of the thing. And I wanted something there that actually in the mind would sort of be something the dog used to be, and has now changed into something that is like a twisted knife.
The burn, I remember the burn when David Clennon's eruption, and then we burned him. That was probably the biggest effect day that we all worked. And the guy who did the burn was I don't remember his name, but he was a specialist at doing these full body burns, and that was very impressive and spooky to be a part of, because what happens is he can't breathe once he's ready to go, because if he does, he'll sear his lungs. He has to do the whole thing holding his breath, and it's all a matter of timing. And then the minute he came off, he had to be put out and immediately, freed so he could draw breath and stuff.
When I started seeing some of the effects that Rob had created, there was one particular sequence where Charlie Hallahan's head comes off the table and the tongue shoots out and it pulls across, turns over and grows stalks and walks across the floor. When I saw that, I realized a great sense of relief, because what I didn't want to end up with in this movie was a guy in a suit. See, I grew up as a kid watching science fiction and monster movies, and it was always a guy in a suit. Or sometimes it was a kind of bad puppet, like It Conquered the World comes to mind right now, Roger Corman's movie, this kind of vegetable monster, kind of going like this woodenly. And my fear was, they'll laugh at us, there'll be a joke. I mean, even as great as the movie was, and Alien was a terrific movie, it's still, in the very end, up stood this big guy in a suit. I don't want to do a suit. I want something that's alive. So when I saw that stuff coming out, I was like, oh man. Now, there were some effects we had to fool with. They didn't work perfectly. Because this stuff is not like, as Rob said to me, it's not like ordering pizza on the phone. You have to build it and create it. And sometimes it doesn't work. In our case, I think it did.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Rob Bottin did the special makeup effects, and Roy Arbogast did the set special effects, the explosions and so forth. But they worked together in one area, and that was in terms of certain construction for the thing, certain size that Rob couldn't handle. In other words, his little team could go so far. So they intermeshed at one point and began a collaboration to pull off that last creature coming up out of the floor and opening up. That was a huge monstrosity. And the size of it was amazing. So we had a lot of work to do.
The first part, which was the pass where he actually has to run underneath the floorboards, that was done by Roy Arbogast. And what they did was they built actually like a train track underneath the floorboards. They put like a huge metal ball on it, and they actually dragged it with a huge cable mounted to a winch that actually was a high-speed winch. So they just flipped the thing, and then this ball would roll underneath and just break all the floorboards up, and that looked very impressive. Then what we see is the floor being ripped up, and now we see this image of Wilford Brimley rising up out of his hole, sort of stuck to a huge tentacle, with all these tentacles that are writhing off of it. His chest actually rips open. This dog starts to struggle out. And because we wanted to open up the scope of what we were seeing, we decided to use animation. And there's this guy, Randy Cook, who's brilliant at stop motion animation. I worked with Randy before and known him for quite a while, and asked him if he would actually do this, the wide shot, which would basically be the worm, the Blair monster, comes up through the floor, and now we're back really far, and we see, oh God, it's huge, and tentacles come flopping out on the deck, and then, we'll cut to a medium shot of the dog actually starting to rip through, Brimley's, chest, and then we'll come back to the wide shot and actually see the dog leap out and land on the floor right in front of Kurt. And so actually, Randy and his crew set to making a miniature version of the whole set.
We designed the dog thing over that. So it was form following function. We did not create freely. We created based on the machine that was going to make this thing work. And when you actually see this dog thing in the movie, you will see that there's this hump, this interesting hump, and this long neck that comes out, and this really cool head that comes around, and is snarling and going through all these gyrations. And it has all this wonderful organic movement, and it's basically because all that organic movement is the person inside it who is disguised by the design. So we came up with a concept, designed to that concept, and literally built a really cool hand puppet with an animatronic face. We literally came in to help out, to take a little bit of this overload, and to do a really fun character and a neat creature and a neat effect. But it wasn't for the credit, and it wasn't for the film. It wasn't my film. It was Rob's film, and he should be very proud of it. I'm thrilled for him, and I think what he did is outstanding.
Station 31. You read me? Found something in the ice. We need some help down here. Can anybody hear me? We found something. We found something. We found something.
The reviews were mixed, I think, with the audience, and there was an alternate ending to the film that was shot. I had spoken to John about this. I had said that I felt, well, gee, this is a terribly nihilistic ending. It's very much of a downbeat. Perhaps we should protect ourselves while we have the principal, Kurt, and just shoot an ending where we see that he survives. And John was open to this, so essentially what he did was he staged a scene in which Kurt has been rescued and is sitting in a kind of small office structure, and he's just had a blood test so that we know that he's not infected. And he has survived this ordeal rather than the kind of mutual death that concludes the film now. He just shot this for protection. We never previewed this. The issue did come up at the conclusion of the two previews as to whether we should perhaps try this ending, see how it flew with the audiences, and or make other adjustments on the film. And I think John essentially at that time felt that he had achieved in the movie what he wanted to do. He had made the story of Who Goes There, the short story from which the original thing was adapted. He was much truer to that, which I think was one of his intentions. He was a great fan of the original thing. He and I watched it at least 2 or 3 times. John's probably seen it 50. And it is a wonderful film. But he wasn't trying to do that film. He was, in a sense, trying to go back to the source of it. And I think he felt he had accomplished that. And so that's the way the film went out.
A lot of the things, though, that bothered the audience more than the monster were the poking around the monster, and poking around human beings that had been burnt. And it was like we all associated to it in terms of it's like gutting a deer. It doesn't. It's part of life. If you hunt and you take the meat, you gut the deer, and it's. I guess it's ugly the first 2 or 3 times you do it, but then after a while, that's what you do with you take them out, you remove them, clean it, get the meat clean, and then you cut the meat up. all of that kind of, when you're doing it, if somebody's not used to doing it, they look at that and they go, this is horrible. But they don't have any problem going to the store and buying that wrapped piece of meat. So they just don't see the other part of it. So in this movie, you see that part. We realized that those parts were probably going to be, to a large degree, rejected. Again, I thought it was great that John didn't stop doing the movie that he set out to do. And I'm very happy that the movie did find its audience, and that it found its audience 20 years or 15 years later was to a great degree expected.
People always come up to me and say, my favorite movie you were in was, a lot of times this happens, that they come up with the thing as the thing that they like the best. But it's as someone else has probably said, this film found its audience not in the theaters at the time. It wasn't a huge hit. It did okay, but in video and on cable, and since then on video, it has a very loyal, very intense following, and that's always fun. I've been involved in several of those that haven't gone through the roof in the box office, but in certain ways have an afterlife that's much stronger.
There's a very somber kind of inevitability to the film. As it begins, you're seeing a helicopter flying, and they're chasing a dog, and already it feels like the end of the world to me. And that's what this is. This is an apocalyptic movie. This is the first of 3 films that I've worked on that have an apocalyptic theme, and I've dealt with them in different ways. This is the end of the world. It doesn't come from bombs dropping. It comes from within. And it was a movie that's tone started and finished. And basically it was almost there's nothing you can do, because here it comes. And of course the thing is a metaphor for whatever you want to say. It's disease, could be AIDS, could be whatever. It comes from within you. It's also basically the lack of trust that's in the world now. We see it all over. Countries, people, we don't trust each other anymore. We don't know who to trust. We're with somebody that we think maybe they're our loved ones and they may attack us. And that's what the thing is. It has a lot of truth in it, kind of dressed up as a monster movie.
Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.